Welcome to Weekend Office Hours with Professor Paul Denary. My name is Sirish Pulusani, and it has been a while since we've done this, and a lot has happened, Paul. Is that right? It just seems like there's a lot going on in the war right now.
A lot is going on, and it's been a bit since you and I have spoken.
Yeah, it's been over a month, so I mean,
really, gosh, yeah.
Everything we got drones flying into Moscow, attacking Moscow. We had the fall of Bukmut to Russian forces. We have the rise of Prighozin, who's this, this military leader who's apparently challenging Putin. This is a very interesting thing I want to get into more because it almost seems suicidal, but at the same time, I don't know what all these different motivations are. So I want to go into that. But let's just start where we ended last time. I mean, since we last spoke, everything I just spoke about, let's start with the fall of Bukmut. Well, what is the significance of this?
Strategically, I always stress this, strategically, it's not that big a deal. It was never strategically important to begin with. It's more strategically important in terms of, you mentioned Yevgeny Prighozen and the Wagner Group, significant for him because the whole thing about Bukmut was he was going to show that he could do what the Russian military couldn't. Turned out to be pretty hard to do, and so it took, basically a whole year to conquer this town. Now they've done it. Symbolically, it's important for Prigozhin and Wagner. Symbolically, it's the first victory of any kind Russia's had in probably close to a year. But it's not a particularly strategic piece of territory, and so the strategic significance of it is yet to be seen. The question being, did Russia lose so many forces in that battle for Bukmut that it is now weakened as Ukraine thinks about counterattacking? Or on the flip side, is it possible that Ukraine lost enough forces defending it that Ukraine is less capable of counterattacking than it would have been?
Yeah, so it sounds like it wasn't very significant to any degree strategically for any of the sides. If anything, it could have been a Pyrrhic victory for Russia.
Absolutely.
Or we don't even know, actually. Absolutely. And you said Prighozin was the main guy who was involved in this this offensive?
Yeah. Sometime last year, the Wagner Group kind of became the main force. He basically said, "Yeah, I'll get you, Bukmut," and brought in this army of convicts, and basically just threw them at the Ukrainian forces.
So explain to me a little bit about it. I want to just understand this. So you have, so the Wagner Group, it's like a paramilitary organization that's really, they're a private army. They're run by Prigozhin. They call him Putin's chef. And then you have the Russian military. Are these two, are they fighting side by side, or is like the Wagner Group doing one thing and the Russian military is doing another thing? Do they hate each other? Like,
definitely yes to the last question. They hate each other. Prigozhin is trying to build himself up and to build up the Wagner Group largely at the expense of the Russian military. So you can imagine the Russian military hates this. So what does the Russian military do? Well, at least according to Prigozhin, right, they try to hamper his efforts at success by not supplying him with weapons. Prigozhin's got all these forces and he's got all these, men and so on and so forth, but he doesn't have, whole warehouses full of shells and tanks and this stuff. He's got to get that stuff from the Russian army. So he's been complaining that the Russian army is undercutting him. And I think everybody sort of expects that that's exactly what the Russian army is doing, because he's spending all of his time saying, those guys are useless and you should prosecute them all. My guys are the ones who can do the job.
Fascinating.
So, yeah.
What is Ukraine like? What is Ukraine or even the West like when they see this kind of infighting happening? Because Prigozhin has criticized Russian leadership, he's criticized the Russian elite. He's potentially challenging Putin right now. Is Putin in on this game? Is this another game that Putin's playing?
It's inconceivable to me that Prigozhin will last one day longer than Putin finds it convenient for him to last. You have to imagine the range of actors inside Russia right now that would love to see this guy dead. So I think, at least among the people I talk to, and this is my impression as well, the sense is this guy is useful to Putin in a couple of different ways. One is, I think he's loyal to Putin, and Putin sees him as being loyal, right? He was originally just a caterer, and he's brought him all the way up. But he's a very useful actor with which to sort of try to whip the army into shape. You could imagine, after what happened last year, Putin thought, what's this army that was supposed to be so vaunted that everybody said was going to conquer Ukraine in 3 days? So you can imagine Putin is very frustrated with the performance of the army. This is a way of maybe getting the army to do more by embarrassing them. And of course, all of this criticism of the army leaders puts a lot of pressure on the army leaders to either perform or go. And so I think it's useful for Putin. And if he crosses that line into too much criticism of Putin, he will.
Yeah.
I think an accident will befall him.
Yeah, so this is what I really wanted to get to, and you answered the question exactly. This is just a larger part of the game Putin is playing, and if Putin wanted to take out Prigozhin, he can. I mean, this is not going to be. He's not a real challenger to Putin in any way. Is really the issue, right?
No. That's great.
Yeah. Okay, so that's interesting. Do you feel Putin's power has weakened at all? And I just want to frame this in the context of the other major event. I mean, this is major news, right? Ukrainian drones struck wealthy districts of Moscow on Tuesday. Yeah. Russia said in what one politician called the most dangerous attack on the capital since World War II. Yeah. So essentially, a bunch of drones flew into the wealthiest neighborhood in Russia. And this was inconceivable a year ago, for sure. Who is behind this, and what's going to happen?
Well, and to just add to that, a couple of weeks ago, there were a couple of drone explosions over the Kremlin itself.
Mm-hmm. They said there was an assassination attempt on Putin,
right, which it clearly wasn't. But so we don't know exactly who's behind this or exactly where the drones came from. I think the United States government seems to think that it was probably in some way connected with the Ukrainian military. But at least from a public perspective, we don't know for sure. That seems fairly reasonable, although there's also been speculation that it's anti-Putin Russian forces doing this, or that it's Ukrainians, but not ones that are under the control of the government. Or there's even speculation after that Kremlin attack that it's a false flag.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you. What is the potential? This is what Putin could be good at, like a false flag operation, like to drum up support.
I try not to be too much of a conspiracy theorist, but I do think this. I don't think this helps Ukraine. To the extent that Ukraine might be behind it, I think it's a mistake. Which is to say, there's lots of evidence from lots of different wars that sort of attacking cities, civilians in cities, does not decrease people's willingness to fight. It increases it, right? And think about all the bombs that have dropped on Ukrainian cities. It's not made anybody in Ukraine say, oh, we should give in to Russia. So I think from a Ukrainian perspective, this is not a good thing. I will say this. I think for Ukraine and Ukrainians to see, after all the bombing that's been done to Ukraine, to see bombs in Moscow or drones in Moscow has got to be hugely encouraging. And so that might be a reason why the Ukrainians would do it, to build up their own morale, even if it builds up Russian morale at the same time.
Yeah. That is a good point. If anything, it can strengthen morale of the country that is being attacked, which makes me even think more that this is, I mean, Putin is a student of history, if anything, right? Like this is a guy who does, he might be a maniac, but he probably reads a ton of books and he's very, very knowledgeable about everything that's happened historically.
So, well, and his whole kind of claim to authority increasingly over the past 10 years has been, I'm the leader that's protecting Russia from its enemies, like World War II. So that's when you said this quote from this Russian official about this is the biggest attack on Moscow since World War II. That's exactly what they want every Russian thinking about. Right? World War II, we were attacked by horrible people and we heroically defeated them. That's Putin's view of this war, and that's what he wants every Russian to think about. Not we're attacking our neighbors and our friends, but bad guys from the West are attacking us.
I mean, how difficult is it to figure out where these drones came from? Has there been any information released at all by the Russian government regarding the drones?
I suspect that it depends. I'm not a real technical expert. If these things are being launched, and flown at low altitudes, it might be hard for like American spy satellites to pick them up. The other thing that's important about this is the fact that these things flew into the middle of Moscow, right? And especially to the Kremlin, it's like that's the most heavily defended site in all of Russia. And somehow some of these drones made it through. So it's terrifically embarrassing, again, to the Russian military. A lot of us, when we were talking about this when it happened, talked about this famous episode, which I'm sure you don't remember, but I'll just recall some history for our viewers, which is that in 1987, right after Gorbachev came to power, but the Soviet Union was still going strong, A 19-year-old German teenager by the name of Matthias Rust flew a small airplane, like a single-engine Cessna or something like it, from Germany and landed it on Red Square, right? Just flew low, so he was under all the Soviet air defense. And this made the Soviets look like idiots, right? They're running the biggest military in the world, and their missiles and this or that, and yet somehow some German kid flew a plane through all of it and landed it right in front of the Kremlin. It's that kind of humiliation.
But at the end of the day, does it really do anything to weaken Putin's grip on power? That's really fundamentally what I want to understand. Is there anything that could possibly happen at this point to weaken this guy's grip on power?
I don't think so.
Nothing.
I don't want to say nothing. I think the important thing for the one thing probably Putin feels he can't afford is to lose this war. Or to be seen as losing this war. And so every time everybody wants to say, well, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, do the other thing. Macron was actually, Macron, the French president, again, was talking this week about kind of concessions we might make in negotiations with Russia. And there's this certain lack of reality in this, which is nobody in Russia, as far as I can tell, is saying anything about negotiations, right? Putin is not thinking about ending this war. He's thinking about winning this war. And if he does want to end it, he's got to think about ending it in a way that he can declare, that he can call victory.
So other than this just prolonged stalemate that's going to go on indefinitely for the next 2 to 5 years, which I'm not sure if we continue doing this podcast for that long, we'll try. But what is going like what is the other scenario? What like that seems one scenario, but what is possibly another scenario here?
I think there's a scenario, and we kind of saw something like this after 2014, after the original invasion, which was a lot of violence. Then the level of violence decreases, and it kind of goes at this steady low level of violence, but without any real peace. And Russia is very good at these so-called frozen conflicts, right? Go to Georgia or to Moldova. There's been this frozen conflict in Moldova with Russian, separatist troops there since 1992. So I think one of the things we need to take in mind is Russia has a different notion of strategic patience than we do.
Yeah, and that might be the case, which brings it up to a larger point, which is it can be a frozen conflict, but Ukraine's very survival, though, is really dependent on the West. So when is the West going to get tired of this conflict?
Well, I think that's a good question, and I will say two contradictory things about that. One is, and I think I might have said this before on the podcast, but if not, I'm going to say it now. If I were Putin, right, I would not have the slightest thought about negotiating anything until after the 2024 presidential election, right? Because why would you make a concession when there's a pretty decent chance that you're just going to get given everything that you want, right? That's the bad news.
Meaning if the government changes in the United States, like if you're saying if potentially if the Republicans come in, that like Putin's going to get what he wants, like they're going to cut off like aid to Ukraine?
Look, the Trump wing of the Republican Party, right? Which now, as far as I can tell, comprises both of the main Republican candidates for president, Trump.
DeSantis too?
Absolutely. That wing of the Republican Party, I would say the best version of it is entirely unsympathetic to Ukraine and wants to cut and run. The worst version of it is actually sympathetic to Putin. There's a lot of people on the American far right and some on the far left who actually voice admiration for Putin. These people come to power, right? But that's the bad news for Ukraine. The good news for Ukraine is at the same time, if you look at what European leaders are saying, it's quite the opposite, right? Macron, who looked very, very wishy-washy early in the war, is now talking about Ukrainian membership in NATO and is talking about Ukraine as a member of Europe. And Ukraine is fighting not just for Ukraine, it's fighting for Europe. So I think there's a really interesting question now as to whether, even if the United States tries to decides it's going to cut and run, the extent to which the Europeans decide that they're going to pick up the slack. Now, in the short to medium term, I don't think that Europe, even collectively, has the hardware. But in the medium to long term, the EU economy is bigger than the U.S. economy, and they've got all kinds of arms companies.
Are they unified like France, Germany, Great Britain? Like, are they all on the same page?
I think they're getting more unified all the time. It's the British really who drove the bus, who sort of drove the deal on supplying F-16s, right? The Brits got out ahead of the United States on supplying F-16s to Ukraine, and so
So let's play devil's advocate here. I mean, this is Europe's responsibility. Maybe this is European responsibility. Why is the United States the main country, especially if we're withdrawing? What we're trying to do here. Like, why should it be the United States' responsibility?
I think this is one of the things that the sort of isolationist wing of the Republican Party has been saying since this conflict began. Not that they're against Ukraine, but that it's not our job; it's the Europeans' job. And it might be, ironically, the case that this, in the medium to long term, leads to that. Really interesting question as to whether that's in the U.S. interest or not. My feeling is, I think the United States, since the 1960s, has been urging the Europeans to take on more of the burden of their defense. And I'm one of those who would love to see that happen. I hope it doesn't happen at the expense of Ukraine, but we'll see.
What do you think as a percentage of the aid and military and everything else that Ukraine is getting from the West in general? Like, what percentage of that is from the U.S. versus European allies, do you think?
Boy, it's absolutely the right question to be asking, and I don't have a good.
Okay, but that's an interesting, because I'm curious, because I'm just curious if America does withdraw support. I don't know how significant it is. I mean, maybe it is the Europeans can take that over and really do something significant there. But I mean,
there are certain things. There are a few things like qualitatively that we have that the rest of Europe doesn't have. Things like HIMARS, Patriot missile systems. Most of what we can do, right? We have M1, A1. We have Abrams tanks, but the Europeans have these German Leopard tanks. We have the Europeans can do most of what we can do. They don't have the stockpiles that we have.
And either way, I don't see any scenario, even though if we might withdraw like aid or supplies to some. I mean, American intelligence is going to be involved in this war one way or the other, right? Like they will be providing all resources necessary for Ukraine and the European allies to win this war.
And there's also a school of thought, Sirish, that says people like Trump, DeSantis, and even some of the Republicans in Congress. It's easy to say you would do things differently when you're not in power, right? And I'll give you an example. Right, Barack Obama said he was going to close Guantanamo Bay. Right, easy thing to say when you're running for president. Hard thing to do when it's okay, what are we going to do with all these guys?
This is a great point. People don't realize the complexity of these situations. We have such limited information. Once you're president of the United States, you have a million things to then think about, and there's all these trade-offs, right? And so even the best intentions you cannot execute upon in these type of scenarios.
Absolutely. Donald Trump was going to get us out of Afghanistan. He didn't manage to do that, right? Joe Biden did it. And
disastrously.
He had to be, and this is the point, right? Exactly, is sometimes in order to do the things you're committed to doing, you not only have to do something that is potentially disastrous for a lot of people, but something that you're absolutely going to get hammered for. If Trump or DeSantis becomes president and they throw Ukraine under the bus, and then the Russians go in and massacre Ukrainians by the thousands and tens of thousands, it's not going to look very good for those guys, right?
No, it's very complex. I mean, there's just too many variables here to even completely wrap our head around it, and that's what we're trying to do and trying to figure out. This war has already surpassed everybody's. It started February of last year, where we just hit June. Okay, so to kind of end this, bring this home. I mean, now it's turning summer. The winter offensive is done. All of that happened. So just wrap it up. What has happened over the past anything significant? I mean, I guess it's just stalemate, right?
Yeah, I'm not quite ready to use the word stalemate, in the sense that what Ukraine quite clearly seems to have been doing through all of this offensive on this attack on Bukmut and the defense of Bukmut and everything else is Ukraine has been preparing the conditions for a counteroffensive, and we. Some say it's already started. We really don't know that. One of the things the Ukrainians have done is done a very good job of keeping their planning secret. So things haven't really happened on the front page of the newspapers, but we think that a lot is happening, getting Ukraine ready to try to take some territory back. And, it's now June, as you pointed out. You have, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 months till the weather gets really nasty again in terms of muddy and so on. And so we're going to see over the next several months whether Ukraine can take some territory back,
Mm-hmm.
and if so, what kind of pressure it can put on Russia.
It remains to be seen. And another thing, Paul, which we're going to do, I think, going forward, is we're going to expand this conversation because I mean, this is geopolitics, right? You're a professor of public policy, political science. It's the entire world, and we've been. This is the focus and the major conflict happening in the world right now, but. So many things happening in the world right now. There's so many
Absolutely.
moving parts. What happened? What happened in Turkey recently with the election of Erdogan? I mean, we need to go into that. We need to go into China.
Yep.
United States. I want to start talking about politics more. You know, I kind of
Right.
ignored politics for a good amount of time to the benefit of my mental health, but maybe I need to.
You saying that talking to me is not good for you?
These discussions are fine. I think watching the news is not good for anybody. So that's my point. But essentially, the election, the United States election, is literally about to begin in earnest, right? And there's a lot of in Biden. I mean, is this guy? Is he going to be running our country for the next 4 years again? It's going to be a good question. Is he the leader that we need? Is it going to be DeSantis? Who knows? But whoever it is, we are entering a phase of history, I think, that is critical. And it's critical because of the planet, AI, the changes and authoritarian governments. It's a lot to navigate right now, and the leaders of these countries are all important in kind of the direction they're going to be taking everybody in, right? And so I think this is the discussion of our time is like, what direction is the world going in with all these crazy variables going around? So excited to continue this, Paul. Super insightful as always. I think it's very fascinating what's happening, and obviously anything significant that happens during this conflict, we will continue to discuss as well.
Sounds good.
We will see you next time.